The Collins family estate sat nestled at the edge of Eastwick Hollow, a stretch of old-growth forest known for its sprawling canopies and eerie silence. The manor, all red brick and wrought iron balconies, had once looked charming to Lyra. Now, with autumn clawing its way across the grounds, the place seemed cold, almost hostile. Lyra was 8 months pregnant, her belly round beneath her rust-colored cardigan. Leaves crunched beneath her boots as she stepped out of the car, Daniel's hand warm against her back. He leaned down to whisper, "Just stay close, okay?" She nodded, already scanning the crowd of well-dressed relatives. They were all here, some she recognized from photos, others strangers to her. But one face she knew too well. Clarissa. Her mother-in-law. Perched on the patio like a queen on her throne, Clarissa Thornhill exuded elegance with every movement. Her icy gray eyes flicked toward them, and Lyra's stomach tightened. Daniel squeezed her hand. "She'll behave," he said, not sounding convinced. The annual Thornhill family gathering was supposed to be a celebration. A homecoming of sorts. Lyra had hoped that with her nearing due date, the atmosphere might be warmer, more accepting. But Clarissa was not a woman who softened with time. As guests arrived and champagne was passed around on silver trays, Lyra focused on the warmth of Daniel's presence and the kind chatter of his younger sister, Cassie. Cassie was her only ally in this sprawling estate of frosty glances and whispers. "You look stunning," Cassie said, tucking a loose curl behind her ear. "Pregnancy looks good on you." "Thanks," Lyra replied, offering a tired smile. "Feels like I'm carrying a bowling ball wrapped in fire, but thanks." Cassie laughed. "Well, you're doing it gracefully. Ignore Mother. She's already wound up." Lyra's gaze flicked toward the veranda. Clarissa stood surrounded by a circle of relatives, whispering behind manicured hands. "She's always wound up," Lyra murmured. Dinner was set in the garden, under strings of warm fairy lights and a linen canopy. Silverware gleamed. A string quartet played soft jazz. It was perfect on the surface, like everything the Thornhills did, but Lyra knew what lay beneath. Clarissa approached as guests began to take their seats. "Lyra," she said, voice smooth as porcelain. "Still working, are you?" Lyra blinked. "Yes. Just for a few more weeks." Clarissa's smile didn't touch her eyes. "You must be very confident, juggling all that. Motherhood is not for the faint-hearted." "I'm prepared," Lyra replied evenly. "Preparedness and capability are different things, dear." Before Lyra could speak, Daniel cleared his throat sharply. "Mom. Let's keep the reunion festive, okay?" Clarissa's eyebrows lifted. "Festive, of course. I was merely making conversation." But her message was clear: Lyra did not belong. Throughout dinner, the comments continued, veiled barbs about Lyra's health, career, and parenting instincts. "Some women just don't know when to slow down," Clarissa said at one point, sipping from her crystal goblet. Lyra wanted to scream. She gripped the edge of her plate instead. Cassie tried to cut through the tension. "We've started decorating the nursery," she said brightly. "It's forest-themed. Daniel painted tiny deer on the walls." "Oh?" Clarissa tilted her head. "I always imagined my grandchildren would grow up with something more refined." Daniel's fork clinked too hard against his plate. After dessert, Lyra stood to get some air. The garden had grown colder. The laughter sounded farther away. She wandered toward the balcony overlooking the east wing, her belly heavy, her body aching. Clarissa followed. "Let's speak," she said. Lyra turned, her breath forming a mist in the air. "About what?" "About your future," Clarissa said. "And this family's." There was something strange in her tone, urgent, sharp-edged. "You're not ready to raise a Thornhill," Clarissa said. "You're soft. Distracted. Daniel deserves someone with strength, with heritage." Lyra's heart pounded. "You think you get to decide that?" Clarissa took a step forward. "I think you've overstayed your welcome." There was silence. Cold wind rustled the ivy. Then a voice called out, "Cassie's, Lyra. Aunt Helena wants to see you." The spell broke. Clarissa stepped back, lips pressed into a tight line. "Enjoy the party," she said, and vanished into the shadows of the corridor. Lyra stood frozen for a beat longer, her hand on her stomach. The baby shifted inside her, and she whispered, "It's okay. I've got you." But something had changed. She had seen the fury behind Clarissa's eyes. The warning in her voice. This wasn't just disapproval anymore. This was war. The sky was darkening by the time Lyra and Daniel returned to the main estate. The dinner had gone off without a scandal, barely. Clarissa's comments had been sharp but sheathed, her smile so tight it was practically cracking porcelain. The Thornhills always played their games in whispers, and Lyra had become adept at recognizing daggers beneath silk. Back inside the house, the evening took on a new rhythm. Jazz music floated from the parlor, guests sipping digestives or wandering off in clumps for after-dinner conversation. Lyra tried to stay near Daniel, but the flow of the event pulled them apart as he was swept into a discussion with his uncles about business mergers. She politely excused herself and made her way to the grand staircase where Cassie was showing an aunt the new chandelier. "Come upstairs with me for a moment," Cassie said, taking Lyra's arm. "I want to show you the nursery we set up for your visit. It's small, but I added some lavender sachets under the crib. I read it helps babies sleep." Lyra smiled. Cassie had always been the soft edge in a family full of iron. She was the only reason Lyra had agreed to attend this reunion at all. They reached the second floor, walking past oil paintings of Thornhill ancestors and grand marble busts lit with flickering sconces. Lyra chuckled as Cassie led her into the room. "Are these portraits staring at us? They're judging us for being joyful," Cassie teased. The nursery was cozy, painted in a pale sage green, with a rocking chair beside a curtained window. Cassie knelt to show Lyra a hand-stitched mobile she'd made from felt animals, owls and foxes and tiny bears. "I thought it might be nice for the baby," she said, a bit sheepish. Lyra's eyes welled up. "Cassie. This is beautiful." Cassie shrugged. "Your family." Lyra sat on the edge of the daybed, her hand on her belly. "You don't know how much that means." Before Cassie could reply, the door creaked open. Clarissa stood in the hall like a wraith emerging from the shadows. "There you are," she said, voice smooth but tight. "May I speak with you, Lyra?" "Alone." Cassie's posture stiffened. "Mother." "It's important," Clarissa cut in, and her tone wasn't one to be argued with. "I'll be downstairs," Cassie said hesitantly, casting Lyra a worried glance before disappearing. Clarissa stepped inside, closing the door behind her. She remained standing, her fingers laced before her like a judge about to issue a verdict. "Daniel is being blinded by affection," she began. "You've manipulated him into believing you belong in this family. But I see the truth." Lyra stood, her voice calm. "The truth is I love your son, and he loves me." Clarissa's smile was thin and acidic. "You've charmed your way in, but charm fades. Legacy doesn't. We are Thornhills. We have standards." Lyra didn't flinch. "You think I'm beneath you because I work in a field you don't understand, because I don't come from old money, because I speak my mind. But I'm not going anywhere." Clarissa stepped forward, her mask slipping for just a moment. "You're not fit to raise a Thornhill child. You've made Daniel soft." "I've made him happy," Lyra shot back. Their eyes locked, both women holding ground. Clarissa broke the silence. "Then you leave me no choice." Lyra blinked. "Excuse me?" Clarissa turned sharply and opened the door. "Get your things. You're no longer welcome here." Lyra stared at her, stunned. "You're throwing me out?" "I'm preserving the legacy of this family," Clarissa said, voice trembling with restrained fury. "You'll thank me one day." Lyra stepped forward, adrenaline sharpening her voice. "You don't get to make that call. Daniel invited me here. He is your son. Not your puppet." Clarissa's eyes gleamed. "Daniel's love won't last if I cut the strings you've tied him with. He'll wake up. I'd rather sleep under a highway bridge than bow to you," Lyra hissed. Clarissa's hand twitched at her side, but she said nothing. Instead, She turned and walked swiftly down the hallway. Lyra trembled, heart pounding in her chest. Her baby kicked, and she pressed her hands against her stomach. "We're okay," she whispered. "We're not going to be bullied." As she stepped back toward the staircase to find Daniel, her foot caught slightly on the top step. She braced herself instinctively, but then, from behind, came a gasp and the quick patter of heels. "Lyra, wait!" Cassie called. Lyra turned. And Clarissa appeared again, closer than before. Too close. In a single terrifying moment, Lyra saw it, the flicker of movement, the reach, the shift in weight. But Cassie stepped between them at the last second. There was a scream. A rush of fabric. A thud. Cassie's body tumbled down the grand staircase. Everything stopped. Lyra stood frozen, mouth agape, the blood draining from her face. Relatives began to scream. Daniel's voice rose from somewhere below. "Cassie!" Lyra ran down the stairs, nearly stumbling herself. Cassie lay at the bottom, crumpled, motionless, one leg twisted beneath her. "Call 911, Lyra shouted. Clarissa stood at the top, her hands over her mouth, eyes wide with dawning horror. I thought it was." Daniel ran past her, nearly knocking a side table over, dropping to his knees at Cassie's side. "Is she breathing?" Lyra asked, voice shaking. "Barely," he rasped. "She's unconscious." Lyra looked up, looked right at Clarissa. She wasn't crying. Not yet. But her composure had cracked. Everyone was staring now. And they all knew. She hadn't slipped. She hadn't tripped. She had reached out. Daniel looked up at his mother, his face pale and furious. "You meant to push Lyra." Clarissa didn't answer. But she didn't have to. The ambulance lights bathed the grand estate in eerie red and blue flashes, as if the world itself had turned upside down. Guests murmured in disbelief, coats pulled tight against the sudden chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Cassie was wheeled out on a stretcher, her face pale and expression slack, while paramedics murmured clipped codes into their radios. Lyra stood beside Daniel on the stone porch, her arms wrapped protectively around her belly. Her fingers trembled, but she kept her chin high. She had to. For the baby. For Cassie. For herself. "She's still unconscious," Daniel muttered, watching the ambulance doors close with a heavy thud. "They said she might have a concussion. Internal bleeding. Broken ribs, God, Lyra, if she..." He broke off, raking a hand through his hair. "She's strong," Lyra said, trying to believe it. "And she was trying to protect us." Daniel turned to her, guilt flooding his eyes. "This is my fault. I should have stopped Mom years ago." Lyra shook her head. "No, Daniel. This is Clarissa's fault. She made this choice. And now she has to live with it." The front door creaked open behind them. William Thornhill, the patriarch, stepped onto the porch, his tailored coat thrown over one shoulder. His eyes, usually full of quiet dignity, were shadowed and glassy now. "She's been taken to the study," he said simply. "Your mother." "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Daniel replied. "You just have to listen." He stepped back inside without another word. Lyra followed. The study was dimly lit, smelling faintly of tobacco and old books. Clarissa sat in the corner, a crystal glass of brandy untouched in her hand. Her posture was immaculate, but her expression betrayed her, tight jaw, clenched fists, a vein throbbing at her temple. "You have something to say?" Daniel asked, stepping into the room like a man walking into a courtroom, not a family home. Clarissa's eyes flicked up. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone." Lyra spoke before Daniel could. "But you did. You tried to hurt me. Cassie took my place, and now she's in the hospital." Clarissa's voice quivered. I got caught up in the moment. You were antagonizing me. You've been manipulating my son, turning him against me." Daniel slammed a hand on the desk, making a stack of envelopes jump. "Stop it. You tried to push my pregnant wife down the stairs. Do you understand how insane that sounds?" Clarissa flinched but said nothing. William entered behind them, closing the door softly. Clarissa, they're not wrong. This is beyond anything I ever imagined. She stood, her voice sharpening. So what now? Are you all just going to throw me to the wolves? Pretend I'm some kind of monster? You need help, Lyra said coldly. And not the kind that comes from a therapist who charges $500 an hour and tells you you're assertive instead of dangerous. Clarissa's lips parted as if to defend herself, but then a knock interrupted them. A uniformed police officer stepped in, his presence as heavy as the tension in the room. "Mrs. Thornhill," he said, addressing Clarissa. "You're being placed under temporary detainment pending investigation into an act of assault. You have the right to remain silent." Clarissa's face went still. Not tearful. Not shocked. Just eerily still. As if she hadn't believed, even now, that anyone would dare hold her accountable. As the officer gently cuffed her hands in front of her, for procedure, he explained to William, Clarissa glanced at Daniel one last time. "I only ever did what I thought was best for you," she said. He didn't answer. When the door closed behind her, the silence that followed was the loudest thing Lyra had ever heard. They spent the night in the emergency room waiting area, pacing and praying. Cassie was in surgery. There was swelling in her brain and a fractured pelvis. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, but the uncertainty gnawed at Lyra like rust on iron. Hours passed. Daniel didn't leave her side, his fingers laced with hers even as they sat in exhausted silence. Around 3 a.m., the surgeon finally emerged, face tired, cap in hand. "She's stable," he said, his voice a bomb in the darkness. "She'll need time, but she's going to recover." Lyra sank into her chair, crying for the first time since it had all started. The next morning, Lyra was back at the estate, gathering her belongings. "I'm not staying here a second longer," she said to Daniel as she zipped her bag. "Not in a place where our baby was almost lost. Where your sister almost died." Daniel nodded. "We'll go to the cottage. It's still in my name. It's small, but it's quiet. It's safe." Lyra paused. "Are you sure?" His eyes burned with resolve. "This family, the one we're building, it doesn't start with that house, or that name. It starts with protecting what matters." As they packed the car, William approached them. He looked older than he had the night before, as if all the years of ignoring his wife's manipulations had finally caught up to him. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "But I am sorry. For not stopping her. For letting it get this far." Lyra nodded but said nothing. Daniel looked at his father with a mixture of pity and frustration. "If you really want to make things right, testify. Don't protect her this time." William hesitated. Then nodded. Later that week, Lyra sat beside Cassie in the hospital room. Her sister-in-law was awake, pale but lucid, a bandage across her temple. "You should have let her push me," Cassie whispered. "That's what she wanted." Lyra shook her head. She didn't deserve the satisfaction. They shared a tired laugh, one that ended too quickly. "Daniel and I are pressing charges," Lyra said after a pause. "We're going to court. This can't happen to anyone else." Cassie looked away, her voice small. "She'll never forgive you." "She tried to kill me," Lyra said quietly. "I can live without her forgiveness." Cassie smiled faintly. "Then I think you'll be just fine." The courtroom was colder than Lyra expected, sterile and silent, like a vacuum where emotions went to be dissected. She sat between Daniel and their lawyer, her hands folded over the curve of her swollen belly. She felt the baby kick softly, as if sensing the tension. Outside, photographers and reporters buzzed like flies, attracted to the scandal of the century, a respected socialite arrested for assaulting her own niece during a family reunion, allegedly targeting her pregnant daughter-in-law. Inside, the truth was about to be laid bare. The bailiff called the court to order, and the judge, an older woman with keen eyes and an unshakable expression, entered the room with the solemn grace of someone who had seen the worst humanity had to offer. State v. Clarissa Thornhill, the clerk read. Clarissa sat a few tables away, her gray tailored suit pristine, Her hair swept into a perfect chignon. She looked like she belonged on a fundraising gala stage, not in the defendant's chair. But her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, betraying the cracks in her mask. The prosecution began with the evidence, the CCTV footage from the Thornhill estate, the medical reports detailing Cassie's injuries, and the eyewitness testimonies. Every piece of information built like a brick wall around Clarissa, sealing off the excuses she had clung to. Then came the video. It played on the monitor, grainy, black and white, but clear enough to see what mattered. Clarissa approaching Lyra and Cassie at the top of the grand staircase, then shoving the woman closest to her. Cassie! Gasps echoed softly through the courtroom as the footage rolled. No one could argue now that it had been an accident. Clarissa hadn't tripped. She hadn't reached out in panic. She had grabbed and pushed. As the clip ended, Lyra's heartbeat thundered in her ears. She glanced at Clarissa, still expressionless. Still frozen in her own pride. Next came the witnesses. Cassie's testimony was brief but powerful. She walked slowly to the stand, her limp still visible. Her voice trembled at first but gained strength as she recounted the fall, the pain, the moment she realized her aunt had intended to harm someone else. "I saw the look in her eyes," Cassie said. "And it wasn't regret. It was fury. She thought I was Lyra. And when I landed at the bottom of the stairs, she didn't even move. She just stood there." Clarissa's lawyer objected, claimed that Cassie was emotional, unreliable due to the head injury. But the judge waved it off. Lyra was called next. As she rose, the courtroom seemed to shift. All eyes turned to her, pregnant, poised, and utterly determined. She walked slowly to the witness stand, her hand resting on her stomach, her breath even. "I've known Clarissa for 6 years," she began, her voice clear. "And in all that time, she's made it very clear that she doesn't believe I'm good enough for her son." Clarissa's lips twitched, but she said nothing. "She undermined me constantly. Criticized my choices, my career, my body, my family. She told Daniel I wasn't refined enough to carry the Thornhill name. And when I got pregnant, things got worse." Lyra took a breath. "At the reunion, she pulled me aside. She said some people shouldn't reproduce if they aren't strong enough to handle motherhood. I knew something was coming. I just didn't know how far she'd go." She paused, locking eyes with Clarissa. "She pushed Cassie because she thought Cassie was me. That's not an accident. That's intent." Daniel testified next. His jaw was tight, his voice edged with a pain Lyra had only seen once before, at his grandmother's funeral. "My mother has always been controlling," he said carefully. "She's brilliant, but she uses it like a weapon. We let it slide for years because it was easier than fighting. But what happened to my sister? That was the final straw." He turned to the jury, his voice heavy. "My wife could have died. My child could have died. And if I don't stand up now, then what kind of husband, or father, am I?" By the time Daniel stepped down, the atmosphere had changed. The jury was no longer unsure. They were watching a family unravel at the seams because of one woman's obsession with control. When it was Clarissa's turn to speak, the courtroom held its breath. She stood slowly, walked to the stand with practiced elegance, and sat with perfect posture. "I am not a monster," she began. "I am a mother. A mother who has watched her son drift away into the arms of someone I barely know." Lyra felt her blood run cold. "I may have overreacted. But it was not assault. It was a moment. A misunderstanding. A lapse." The prosecutor stood. "Mrs. Thornhill, did you not push the woman standing at the top of the stairs?" Clarissa's voice faltered. "I thought she was Lyra. I only wanted to stop her. To speak to her. Not this. Not this," the prosecutor repeated. "But it happened. And you didn't help her. You didn't call for help. You didn't even check if she was breathing." Clarissa said nothing. When the prosecution rested, the judge called a brief recess. Outside the courtroom, Daniel and Lyra sat in silence. "Do you think the jury will see through it?" she asked. "They already have," he said. She's done. Lyra looked at him. Are you okay? He didn't answer right away. Then, I always knew she was difficult. But I never thought she was capable of this. She was, Lyra whispered. And she'll never admit it. The jury returned in under 2 hours. Guilty. Clarissa was convicted on 2 counts, aggravated assault and reckless endangerment. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She just sat there, pale and still, as the judge announced her sentence, 5 years in prison. When the bailiff led her out, she didn't look back. Lyra watched her go, and for the first time in years, she felt the weight on her chest lift. Daniel turned to her and whispered, "It's over." She nodded. "It's finally over." The day Clarissa Thornhill was taken away in handcuffs, something shifted in the air, not just for Lyra, but for the entire family. The years of silence, of brushing things under the rug for the sake of peace, were over. That night, the Thornhill estate, a symbol of tradition, appearances, and power, felt empty. Not because of the missing furniture or the absence of guests, but because the woman who once ruled it with an iron smile was no longer there to keep everyone in line. And it was better that way. 2 weeks later, Lyra sat in the nursery, folding tiny onesies and stacking pastel-colored blankets on a shelf. The room was bathed in sunlight, the yellow curtains fluttering gently in the breeze. It smelled of lavender and fresh paint. A mobile spun slowly above the crib, soft lullaby notes tinkling faintly in the background. Cassie was seated across from her, her leg still in a brace but healing well. She smiled as she held up a tiny pair of baby booties. "Is it weird that I envy this baby's wardrobe?" Lyra laughed. "Not at all. If I didn't have swollen feet and no energy, I'd be matching her every outfit." Cassie looked around the room, her gaze settling on the painted mural Daniel had done himself, a tree with sprawling branches, each one filled with animals, stars, and names of family members. There was something symbolic in it now. One branch had been pruned, painfully so, but the rest remained, vibrant and growing. "You know," Cassie said, "I used to think Mom was invincible. That nothing could ever touch her. She made everyone feel like they were just passing through her world." Lyra nodded. She believed power meant control. Cassie turned to her, voice softer now. "But you proved her wrong. You didn't fight her with cruelty. You just stood your ground. That changed everything." Lyra felt a tightness in her throat. "I didn't feel strong most of the time. I just couldn't let her win. Not when my baby's safety was on the line." There was a beat of silence. Then Cassie reached out and placed a hand over Lyra's. "Because of you, I'm still here. And because of you, that baby will never grow up thinking love means fear." Lyra blinked back tears. Later that evening, Daniel returned from the local community center where he'd started volunteering part-time, helping with legal education classes. His shoulders relaxed the moment he stepped into the nursery, his eyes lighting up at the sight of Lyra and Cassie mid-laugh. "I smell muffins," he said, sniffing dramatically. Cassie grinned. "You can thank me. I guilted the bakery down the street into giving me a trauma discount." "Whatever works," he replied, pulling up a chair. Then his expression softened. "Doctor said everything's still good?" Lyra nodded. "Healthy heartbeat. Strong kicks. And very little patience. I think she wants out." Daniel reached over and rested a hand on her belly. "Then we better be ready." They were. Maybe more than ever. That weekend, Lyra's father-in-law William stopped by. He looked older than Lyra remembered, more fragile, but his presence was peaceful now. Without Clarissa beside him, he spoke slower, smiled more, and listened like he was finally learning how. "I've started writing," he confessed one afternoon while they all shared tea. "A memoir. I want to be honest about what happened. About how silence let things fester. And how accountability isn't cruelty. It's love in action." Cassie nodded. "It's time this family stood for something real. And that's exactly what they did." Lyra gave birth on a cool spring morning, the skies washed with pale clouds and the scent of rain hanging in the air. Labor was intense, grueling and unrelenting, But when her daughter was placed in her arms, Lyra forgot the pain instantly. The baby blinked up at her with bright, curious eyes and a tiny wrinkled brow that somehow looked just like Daniel's. They named her Mira. The name meant wonder in several languages, and that's what she was. A miracle born from chaos. A symbol of what could be rebuilt from ruins. Cassie cried when she held her. William brought a handmade wooden rattle. Even the hospital nurses remarked at how peaceful the energy in the room was, despite everything the family had been through. But Lyra knew it wasn't peace by accident. It was peace they had fought for. When they brought Mira home, the house no longer echoed with judgment or fear. It was filled with laughter, late-night feedings, baby hiccups, and the quiet moments of new life blossoming. Evelyn's presence had left a scar, but not a curse. The family began new traditions. Sunday brunches with neighbors and friends. Monthly donation drives in Myra's name for children's shelters. Story nights in the nursery, where Daniel read books with dramatic voices and Lyra snapped photos of every adorable reaction. And on the anniversary of that terrible family reunion, they didn't hide. They hosted a second chance gathering, inviting anyone in the community who needed family, people who had lost someone, been rejected, or simply felt alone. No hierarchy. No judgment. Just food, warmth, and welcome. Cassie helped organize it every year. William spoke about breaking generational patterns. Daniel played piano. And Lyra? She stood beside them all, Mira balanced on her hip, knowing that sometimes the family you're born into doesn't define you. The one you build does. As Mira took her first steps across the garden a year later, falling into Lyra's arms with giggles and claps, Lyra looked around and realized she had done more than survive. She had rewritten the ending of her story. And in doing so, given her daughter a new beginning. She whispered to her softly, "You are loved, little one. And no one will ever make you doubt it." Because this time, they were building a legacy not of power, but of compassion. Of truth. Of love without conditions. And that legacy? It started with a woman who refused to fall,